Empower your leadership journey with the CEO Series. Whether you're at the gym, strolling, or commuting, our impactful dialogues with world-class leaders are just a click away. Immerse yourself in the minds of visionaries shaping today's most influential companies and innovations. It's not just an interview. It's a masterclass in leadership. Don't miss out. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and major streaming platforms.
Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it is the CEO Series. And today our guest is Gerry Crispin, longtime friend, but a true visionary, lifelong learner, mentor to so many people in the business, and the founder of CareerXRoads. So we're going to be talking with Gerry today to get insights as to leadership, mentorship, and all the cool things he's going to bring forward. So with that, I want to welcome you, Gerry, to the show.
Thank you, Ron. It's a pleasure to be here. You're one of my longtime characters out there doing interesting work. So, part of what I do is just follow, it's good.
I appreciate that. And last time we were together was in Singapore 3-4 years ago, when you were hosting a dinner for the Singapore delegation and we'll talk through that, where you bring HR people from across the globe and visit all these amazing cities. So we'll talk through that. But that was the last time we were together. Yeah.
It was fun.
Yeah. So walk us through your career journey. You're at the top of the pyramid. I mean, when I say top of the pyramid, you're a mentor to so many people in this industry. Walk us through that from coming out of college to getting to where you are today.
Sure. I have to tell you that, I've been in recruiting and or human resources for 55 years. So really, there is a long journey there in relation to that. So I'm going to try to do this two ways. One is to give you a very fast set of facts that I think are relevant to who I am. But I want to tie it together at the end with a story about what I did that made sense in putting my career in perspective. And I did that at a very early age, and I was very fortunate to do that. And so I grew up as an Army brat. My father served in 2 wars, and we lived in about 15 different states, 2 places in Germany. And by the time I was in high school, I'm kind of settling down in an area where I have a lot of cousins, et cetera. And I mention it because when you are constantly moving as a young child, there's this sense of, where do I fit? I have to go into a new school on a regular basis, make new friends, and then they're gone within the year. So the whole idea about community and belonging became something that I didn't have words to describe it, but I knew the feelings of what I wanted when I went to college. I went to a small college, Stevens Institute of Technology, and got a Bachelor of Engineering in 1969. And it was only about maybe 400 kids who were in my class. By the time we were seniors, there were about 240. I was very lucky. And the kids all get plenty of jobs. I had 15 job offers for things like paint engineer at Ford or sales engineer at Train. And that forced me to go, what the hell am I doing? That's not the view of myself that I had. And I was fortunate that a professor in graduate school came to me and said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you an internship to pay for graduate school, and you can teach. I said, I've never taught anything. He said, that's okay. I know you could do it. And I said, well, what am I going to teach? He said, psychology. I said, I've never taken a psychology course. He said, well, go take some. But in 3 months, you're going to be teaching psychology to 90 kids in 3 different classes. So I spent 6 years in graduate school.
Really?
Studying industrial organizational behavior and becoming fascinated by recruiting. At a very early stage, I was amazed by it, and how flawed it was, how crazy it was. And halfway through my graduate work, I got a job in career services. And there's a bunch of stories someday I'd be happy to share about career services. But I'm going to tell a story at the end that relates in terms of that. When I graduated with a master's degree and most of a doctorate, I suddenly realized I'm married, I'm having a kid, I need to make some money. I need to get the hell out of here because they're not paying me anything. I guess I was getting I probably was making about $10,000, $11,000. So I went to Johnson and Johnson, where I spent the next 10 years pretty much as a loose cannon. Many stories, got promoted many times and ended up after about 10 years being a director of human resources for one of their divisions.
Okay.
And my mentor basically said, well, you're going to be one of the next in line for a VP position. And I'm going, I don't want to be a VP. I said, I've been watching the VPs and what they do. I said, that is the most boring shit I've ever seen in my life. I said, I'm out of here. Give me a package. And he did. And so my father was going, are you nuts? That kind of thing. But I bummed around a little bit. I worked in executive search. I worked as a contingent recruiter for Roche.
Okay.
So everything was in recruiting in one way, shape, form. Worked for a company called Olin Hunt Chemical Corporation that was not living up to the kind of values that J&J did. So ran into some tough issues about your ethical focus in terms of what you'd be willing to do. I remember going back when they laid me off, I said to my wife, I always wondered what would happen if push came to shove. Now I know.
It came to show.
But they wanted me to fire somebody who they shouldn't have wanted me to fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I refused to do it. And so there's long stories. I have long stories about all of these things.
Yeah.
And I tell you, each one of them informed me about who I am.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's a choice that you make at each time that you're faced with a decision about how you operate in support of your business, your whatever. So I worked for a recruitment advertising firm for 10 years, built and managed it as managing director, if you will, on the East Coast. It was a national firm, Shaker Advertising, and they were doing about $200-300 million at the time, putting ads in newspapers. How dinosaurs
is that right? That statement.
but that was the job board of the past.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then in the mid 90s, I spied this thing called the internet, and I started tracking. And I used the one of the big computer magazines. I started tracking because it typically had hundreds of ads, and I tracked the percentage that were saying if you want, you can send us your resume via email.
Okay.
And that percentage, was 1 or 2 or 3, and then it started growing at an exponential rate. And then you had Personic, you had the technologies beginning to come in, and so rather than the hype around the internet, we were talking about what was changing, where the money was going. for recruiting. And so I started collecting data about the kinds of sites on the internet. And I published a book in 1996, took it to SHRM's National Conference, gave a talk about HR and the internet. That was the title of my talk.
Whoa.
The place was packed. 25% of the people in the room had email, and only 5% had ever seen a page on the internet.
Wow.
In June of 1996. My business partner who put this book together with me, we called it CareerXRoads. It was about 300 pages and had a lot of, tools in it that were available because you couldn't use Google because it didn't exist.
Yeah.
There was no real search engine. So this was a paper book that would tell you how you could recruit on the internet. We brought a couple hundred copies. We sold 5,000 or 6,000 that day.
Really?
We had to go over and over again. So over 8 years, I consulted and sold books, probably close to 500,000 books at $22 a piece. And since we printed the books ourselves,
pretty cool, right?
We were getting a decent margin, if you will.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But we realized, to finish that off, in the early 2000s, 2001, 2002, we realized that there was a change, that Google existed, that much of the content that you have, you could get using online capability. But what was happening is, in that era, most of the big companies that were integrating new approaches to recruiting with internet-based technologies weren't allowed to share that. PR and legal thought that this was proprietary.
Okay.
So they were limited at conferences to saying, well, we're looking at this, we're doing that, here's the pilot, whatever. You really weren't getting the nitty-gritty.
Okay.
And we thought, what if there were a safe place where people who are doing shit could talk to one another, knowing that it's not going to get out into the, Wall Street Journal, that vendors aren't going to be swamping them, and peers and colleagues could be engaging each other about what works, what doesn't work. But at that point, I was capable of saying, I only want to surround myself with people that have 4 characteristics. 1, they have to demonstrate to me that they're passionate about recruiting. 2, they need to show me that they are compelled to improve what they do. 3rd, that they have critical thinking skills and can challenge one another in a constructive way. And 4, they're willing to share unconditionally.
Wow.
And even today, about 20% of the companies that I meet can't do that. And so I don't want their money, because I don't want in the room takers without being willing to give.
I understand.
So today we have about 100, 120 employers who are participating in CareerXRoads as a membership, a community membership that literally requires that they share. So they share, the resources they're using, the ratings they have of those resources, Usenet user cases, and so on. And when they're doing really good work, I work very hard to get them up to speed and go to a conference and share more publicly what they're doing. So that's the journey I'm still on. We've done a couple other things, which we'll get to, but I'm going to go back to how it all fits together.
Okay.
When I
That's
was
cool. Go ahead.
When I was in career services, in 1975, 76, not 75, it was about 73, there was a recession. And instead of dealing with students that had to, get a job, because that was easy, how hard is it to help a student get a job in an engineering school that, 300 employers come to engage 300 kids, right? So we were starting to get alumni coming back. And in that era, and I remember vividly, a man from a professional electrical engineer from Raytheon came in. He had 19 years with Raytheon.
Mm-hmm.
The rule in that day, legally, was that you need 20 years in order to vest your pension.
Well,
now that changed. From a human resource point of view, that changed. But at the time, there's a guy who is almost suicidal in terms of what he has lost.
Yeah.
Being laid off. And I went to my boss and I said, I can't deal with this. I am not competent to deal with somebody with 19 years of service who fundamentally is in, extreme, concern.
Distress, yeah.
He said, go get some learning. He says, go find a course that you could go to and I'll pay for it. So I did. I found a week-long course run by a guy named Richard Bowles, who had just written I think the third edition of What Color Is Your Parachute?
I remember that book. Yeah.
It's still one of the books that is out there. Now he passed a couple of years ago. He became a lifelong friend, but two days into this, he said, I want you all to engage in an exercise. You got 15 minutes, write your obituary. And I said, well, how hard could that be? I'm the youngest person in this class. So I pen, about 4 paragraphs. And I then read it to myself. And I said, oh my God, what an asshole. If that's the sum of my life. Of all of it? So I had one of those peak experiences, where the light bulb goes on and says, wait a second, who are you? Why are you here? And I'm a little young for that sort of stuff, but I became obsessed. It took me about 2 weeks, and I was able to pen something that you could imagine. It had to do with impact on relationships and people one-on-one, as opposed to, I'm going to be the richest, the most
CEO,
all of that, So I said, if that's the sum, I'm okay with that. And I folded it up and put it in my wallet. And every change that I made from jobs, as I got promoted in all parts of my career, I pulled that out and asked myself whether or not I could, in that role, contribute to that person, if you will, whoever that is. But that's my aspiration. And when I was 55, I pulled it out for the last time. And I realized I was that person.
Okay.
And I said, oh, yeah.
So,
I've demonstrated that, So I threw it away, and that was 20 some odd years ago.
Okay, cool. That's an amazing journey that you talked about. But I want to, as we were talking before the show started, we talked about how the reason we like to do the show is that it's based on a person's trajectory. How do you get to wherever it is? Because all we see is always the top. But what caught me in that story was that the gentleman from Stevens that said, I want you to teach a course, and you had nothing to do as a reference point with the course, but you took that as a challenge to go back and get prepared to do that. A lot of people would have said, no, don't want to do that, and moved on. So sometimes you make decisions, you never know where it's going to end up. And I think about the professor who saw something in you to say, you know what, I think you have something, and I think you need to
I think there's an element there of being fearless or just stupid, fearless about failing.
Yeah.
You know, if we fail, we should just fail fast and move on.
Yeah.
But there's incredible learning in the struggle to at least even be moderate. I would not call myself the best teacher in the world by a long shot. But over 3 years that I taught, I got better every single time and was forced to learn in a depth that I would not have learned otherwise, how industrial organizational psychology fits the frame of human resources, of recruiting, et cetera.
So just want to say hi to John Self, who's a frequent listener. He says he used the eulogy exercise in his online course. He's in executive search and medical, and central to understanding the big why. You know, as Yogi Berra once said, if you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else. Yeah. So, go ahead.
No, I just want to turn this off. My apologies.
That's okay. It happens.
Yeah, we're good.
The eulogy exercise. I saw an article someone posted on LinkedIn the other day. They went to someone's funeral who was a big shot executive, CEO, C-suite, all the initials. And he said he sat there and thought about how he read through the obituary and there was nothing there about work. There was nothing there about the career and all this kind of thing. But he talked about how he was helping people. He would volunteer every weekend at the soup kitchen. He would do all these other kind of things, which was more purpose-driven than what you would think would be the ladders and the steps you have.
So then work had to allow the purpose-driven pieces to that.
Okay.
And that's, as we look at some of the pandemic issues, that we're starting to blend, if you will, over the last 3 years, our work life, our regular life, our home life, our family life, et cetera, in ways that we balance it. Yeah. And I'm not saying people can do it easily, but fundamentally, for the first time, we're not compartmentalizing and saying, okay, I have to give up 8 to 10 hours every single day, focused on one thing in a place that I had to commute to for an hour and a half. Yeah. That kind of thing. Now, if you have to put food on the table, I get it. But the fun part of this is you can still have a plan to get beyond that.
Yeah. I was in New York 3-4 weeks ago, and I'm commuting into the city, on the train. And I thought to myself, I said, for 20 some plus years, this was an everyday thing. You drive to the train station, you park your car, you get on the train, you go in. And when you finish work, you get back and do the same thing. I said, could I ever do it again? I'm thinking, no, it would have to be some kind of a blend as to how I'm going to live this new life of whatever it would be. And I think based on what you were just saying, I think COVID was a learning experience for not only people, and sometimes we lost people as a result, but for organizations to try and understand, we have to try and rethink things. We have to rethink the way that we're positioning ourselves.
We do. And I know you'd asked a couple things about, and your focus is on leadership and leaders. And the leaders really need to be listening closely to what the needs are of the stakeholders in their process. Because our focus on how we think about efficiency, productivity, et cetera, has got to shift.
Yeah. Has to be that learning curve. But when I'm a big fan of CNBC. I read the business news every day, and I see some statements that are being made, and I'm thinking, what were you thinking when you made that decision?
I know.
Because if you were to take a step back and look back on that 3 to 4 to 5 years later, you would say, I was out of my mind when I even made the decision. I saw one group that was going to do layoffs, and they had everybody to log in. And people were logging in for a normal meeting, and they said a message came up, everybody on the meeting is going to be laid off. and HR will call you, and boom, that was the end of the meeting. And I'm thinking, what were you thinking?
Right. Yeah, I obviously there are a lot of mistakes being made from a leadership point of view. And hopefully they will work themselves out, and some of the folks that do the right job, do it well, are going to be winning, who wants to work for them.
Yeah. So you have interesting stories to tell. How do you stay motivated with, like you're working with a different level of clients now from what you just started, and you're always conveying information. And I know sometimes we come in and we're like, how do you stay focused? How do you stay motivated? Let's go.
Well, it shifts. I think the older you get, it shifts. But let's talk about the difference between a leader and leadership. So for me, I think leadership is something we all can do. It's influencing, outcomes. And the person who is the leader obviously has a responsibility to have an approach, a style, a strategy, or whatever. But you can have and exhibit leadership without being the leader. I prefer to be behind the scenes. I've always had a business partner who did much of the heavy lifting. And my job, as I saw it, was to manage, if you will, influencing against the values that we profess. Right. And I've been fortunate to have two business partners who have been very good in relation to that. The first one, Mark Mailer, was with me for 25 years in CareerXRoads, and he got burned out and retired. And I was potentially going to retire myself, but Chris Hoyt stepped up and was really interested in taking over CareerXRoads long term. And in the 7 years that he's now been with me, he's done an extraordinary job in building out our platform to be able to literally pivot with to much more virtual, because the pandemic didn't require the kind of meetings, in-person meetings anymore. But we still, now that we're coming out of it, we're doing, I think, 6 in-person meetings at headquarters of members. And you asked about motivation. I will tell you what motivates me now is less the facilitation of the conversations that take place in those meetings, and more how we use that to impact our industry and our profession in moving it in a positive way. I'm convinced that we need a stronger voice as a profession and an industry. We need to raise our voice around that. Otherwise, we kind of give to others outside of our industry and profession the ability to write the laws, identify the directives, and tell us what to do in recruiting. And I would rather it's more of a balance in relation as we think about what the stakeholders need from a decision-making point of view. And so we're spending more time. We started a foundation 3 years ago. So a 501c foundation. We've given out 3 $10,000 scholarships for people who are studying HR and recruiting.
Really?
Who are kind of loose cannons. So we're looking for those loose cannons. We had 1,000 people apply for the last one. And many of our members help us deal with that. We've created a mentor platform. We just 6 months ago, with all of the transition of talent acquisition people who are in transition, if you will, and looking for work, we offered free membership to anyone, and 200 people applied. We interviewed more than 200. We gave free membership to over 50.
Wow.
We still help those that we didn't give it to, but our criterion was, can you use our platform to advance, your job, whatever. And more than half of them in the last 6 months have landed.
Wow, that's impactful, because you're saying, like, we've been successful, we've done things and we've learned, and now we want to, give back. I want to do a shout out to Jim Moy, who's my good buddy and was my neighbor in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. We live next door to each other.
Cool.
He says, amen. Most folks don't catch the subtle difference in being a leader and leadership, and anyone can provide leadership. So he was referencing the point that you made, as a result of that. So Jim's a lawyer. He's a big shot lawyer in Washington, D.C., and a good friend. I think that's great.
It is
my big shot friend.
And there is a challenge. The challenge is, how do you get people to step up at a lower level in the organization to provide the kind of leadership that influences those at higher levels to change, perhaps some of the practices. And that's a skill. It's knowledge and skill and experience doing it, but it's also a little bit of risk behavior.
Yeah.
Right. You could find yourself with your hand slapped or out on the road. So
yeah.
It's whether or not you have a set of principles about where we need to be. And I think HR has a responsibility to think that stuff through.
Yeah. So that's a whole nother conversation about
it. Yeah, I know.
I deal with HR teams across the globe. And I say, the days of you doing this in administrative process, you got to get into here inside of the room and talk through strategy and trying to understand the business more and all these kinds of things. And so I applaud you for what you're doing, and I try and do my share when I work with clients across the globe, in doing that. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, though, like, you've had so many, I call them detours. You've had left detour, left turn, right turn. Do I still go straight ahead? What in looking back at your career, what are you most proud of? What would you say? I nailed that. We did a great job as it relates to that. What would that be?
I think I'm most proud of, I think that there were several of us that put together the talent board in 2010. That is now shifted over to ERE after 13 years.
Yeah.
But there was Kevin Grossman, who heads that up.
My good buddy.
Just 2 days ago or 3 days ago, whatever, published the 2023 results of literally, 100,000 plus candidates from 100 plus companies that give us more of a sense of how they are evolving, how candidates are evolving to step up in terms of improving their decision making, in terms of rejecting, if you will, companies for particular reasons, et cetera.
Yeah.
And that data should inform more employers that if they're not meeting at least some of the candidates' needs,
yes,
in terms of setting expectations, in terms of closure, in terms of fairness, in terms of whatever, then they have employees who they hire who have no engagement. And how can they possibly imagine that they're going to perform at the highest level in their industry? Exactly. I just don't see that.
Yeah. I got involved in, let me just throw this in. I got involved in that Canada experience and all of that. When I left, and I told you the story, I left Saudi Arabia and I moved to Dubai as CEO for Great Place to Work, and started looking at numbers and looking at how people were just not engaged, just coming in to stamp it, doing whatever that's not a high productive workforce. How could, if you flip that, the financial benefits for the organization and should cascade down to everyone is phenomenal.
Right.
But again, it's selling this to this so-called C-suite, how important the candidate experiences. That's the first touch point. One of the first touch points in doing that. And sometimes it was like talking to someone that was totally clueless.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I think we spend a lot of time talking about what's wrong.
Yeah.
In HR, in hiring, and whatever. What we need to do is talk about who's doing it well, or at least moving the needle slightly.
Yeah.
And what is it that their practices are that are moving that needle? And if we focus on highlighting the fewer people who are making a dent in a 21st century recruiting and HR world, then perhaps we can inform our laggards. We're a catalyst to inform our laggards and peers about what they need to work on. I'm just saying, I figure I need about 75 more years to do that, but I'm working on it.
You're working on it. Okay. I'm going to be there with you, man. So we'll work on that together. But that's important because, so we go back to leaders and leadership. It's a different day now. And I think lots of times leaders are anchored in a different time zone. And my advice to them, that's not coming back.
Right.
And your customer, which is you have two customers. You have your customers whose revenue is driven, and you have your customers as your employees who are doing the work.
Right.
And we have to keep them engaged as much as possible, or it's kind of a dynamic. We have to figure that out.
Right. Well, I think we've got 100 years plus of data and writing in terms of that. If you look at Taylor, who wrote Principles of Scientific Management in 1911, he described, I think it was in chapter 3, how to recruit. And you know what? It sounds just like what we do today.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
And it's very mechanistic, and we can put a body in a seat and we can measure their performance. But obviously he was looking at a different kind of world at that time. We need to change things in kind, because that model no longer really works. And yet much of the technology is geared towards taking the flawed data that comes in and imagining that we can turn that from garbage into something useful.
Yeah.
And we can't. And so we have to really think about start by saying, how are we collecting data? And is the technology sufficient now to be able to do that? So think about, I'll give you one radical suggestion, which is, imagine that on average, you're getting 100, 200 people applying for every job. And they've sent you their resume. And now you've got all these tools that try to consume that data and determining which ones you should have on a slate. And you know that there's going to be some kind of bias in relation to that. What if instead the person who submits, if you will, that they're interested, nothing else, is now kind of accosted by a kind of human voice that says, "Hi, I see that you're interested in this job. If you've done some due diligence to learn about that, I promise that you will get up to bat.
Okay.
And here in the next 72 hours, if you're ready now, I can interview you now. If you interview in 2 to 3 days, I can interview in 2 to 3 days, because I'm not human. And I know how to ask you questions for this job. I know how to collect that data from you. If you're prepared and ready, I can even do sign language, and I can speak in 20 different languages."
Wow.
But so at the top of the funnel, we could change the perception of candidates about whether they get up to bat or get ignored totally.
Totally.
Everyone gets up to bat, just not with a human yet. then if you can collect data in a consistent, defensible way, you can A, give feedback that can be helpful for those individuals, and B, defend more effectively who you go forward with.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can deal with the human, but now you've got a better slate, and you've impacted the perception of an entire group of candidates who've come in contact with you,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and in a positive way.
So you mentioned the term funnel for the people who are don't have an understanding of recruiting. So the funnel is when you post an ad or however you do that, and everything comes in. So that could be 1,000 people that come through the top of the funnel, and then it comes down to easily. And then the numbers of people, beyond that. I remember when I was at Martha Stewart, I asked the young lady, I said, did you post a job yet? This was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She says, no, I'll post it tomorrow morning. She said, because if I post it tonight, I'm probably going to have 500 to 600 CVs, and I don't want to deal with it now, and I'll do it tomorrow morning. And this was the old way, because they was either you posted, they would send in an email or whatever it was, and do it that way. But I want to go back to Kevin, because I think Kevin's group, Kevin's a good friend of mine. Kevin sent me the last book that they wrote.
Yep.
And I was in Doha, and I was on my flight back to New York, and I said, I'm going to read this. And I downloaded it, and I told Kevin, I said, it was the worst trip ever. I said, because I couldn't sleep because the book was so engaging. Talking about the evidence behind it. It was just,
it had a great forward to it.
Yes, I did do that. Yeah. And it was just amazing. I said, so thank you for not letting me enjoy my trip and watch some movies or whatever it was. So, all that was cool. So we talk about technology. So AI is coming in, all these kinds of things. I've often said sometimes, the old way of doing it is that you put your CV in a bottle and you throw it in the middle of the ocean, and you hope somebody opens it, or you hope somebody catches it. So I'll flip that to say the candidate experiences, which I was talking about when I got kind of sidetracked with Kevin. If you go to a website, you see a job posting and it says, apply with LinkedIn. I click on apply with LinkedIn. Then it flips it over. And then you've got to fill out everything, 5, 10, 15 minutes to fill out everything. You click submit. It comes back and it's buffering and says start all over again. Or it said at a first slice, which I like, it said apply with LinkedIn. And then if it comes beyond that, if someone wants to talk to you beyond that, I can say, come back, let's do a more formal kind of approach in doing that. So, and when I follow all these groups, and one of the things I've noticed that a lot of people are getting frustrated, even going through the process of applying for a job.
Sure. Oh, without a doubt. And so that's why I'm saying, especially as AI starts becoming more prevalent.
Yeah.
We know that increasingly the recruiters are using AI to describe, essentially their job. And then the candidates are taking that description and their resume and asking ChatGPT or whoever to redo their resume to be aligned with that job. And so, you just forget that. What if you said you don't have to do anything but decide that you're interested, click one thing that says, I'm interested in this job. And there is an entity, if you will, that is friendly and helpful, and granted, that might be a year or two, who can say, I'm going to collect the data from you about your job, about this job, from the point of view of the skills, knowledge, and experience that you have. And I'm asking you the exact same questions I'm asking every single person who said that they're interested. And at the end of that, I'm going to use the responses that you have given me and all the others in the decision-making process for the next phase, which we think is a fair approach to how we would approach this. What do you think? And I believe that for the most part, people go, oh yeah, how much time should I have? Well, you're going to be giving me more information than you would have if you were uploading resumes, but you should prepare for about an hour, and I can do it in any hour you want.
Wow. So I saw in a video with the Airbnb in the APAC region, because I do a lot of work there. And Airbnb, they have the old way you apply, and they send you a status sheet, and then they say, here's a recruiting video, and they walk you through the recruiting phase. But one of the things that caught me with that is they say, we will try as much as possible to interview you in your native language. Now, this is in Singapore.
Sure.
So Singapore, you've got Malaysia, you've got Vietnam, you've got all these countries that everyone speaks a different language. So if I've got an interview in Singapore and I'm Vietnamese, I may not be able to let it all come out, because it's a different language, and I'm trying to bridge it across. And they said, we will try as much as we possibly can to interview in your native language. And I said, that is so cool, because
why not?
In that region, I mean, you'll have these kinds of so-called difficulties that you would not have, say, in the U.S.
Sure.
But you're aligning it with the market. So we're coming up close to the time, but I wanted to ask you. So you talked about the professors who kind of guided you or put you in situations that you had to step up to the plate. What would you say was the most important leadership lesson that you've learned throughout your career? Do we have another hour for that one?
Yeah, I know. It's I saw that question. And I am just a fan of servant leadership.
Okay.
I'm and there's books relative to that.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's how you approach people and listen to them, and understand, the kind of decisions that you can make that can accommodate every stakeholder to the extent that it can, and then be transparent about what you can and cannot do.
Okay.
And I think when leaders begin to show that they care about the people they lead, you change the game from command and control to a much more to network, community, that kind of thing.
Purpose.
That's a piece of it.
Okay.
And I do think that we need to give much more opportunity for people to develop themselves. Yeah. We've cut a lot of that out of budgets, and I get it, but we've got to do something there to be better at that. And we have to take more risk in terms of internal movement. There's a lot more people that can step up if you give them the chance.
There we go. Yeah. And
we're talking about it, but I want to see more examples of it.
Yes. Give me the numbers. I always call that. So tell me your internal external ratio. What is that? How many you hired? 100 people last year. Where did they come from? Did they come from outside, or did they come from internal?
Right. And where are they now? Yeah.
Where are they now? Yeah. So it comes back to that. So as we begin to close out, one of the goals of the show, and we talked about this earlier, was to bring on leaders, successful people who've done some cool things, and specifically yourself, because you've been such a mentor for this entire profession. Everyone, folks, whoever's listening, everyone across the globe knows who Gerry is. So you've always given back, and so do you have any closing thoughts before we close out?
I think that there's a strong community of folks throughout our profession who are more than willing to give back, to pay it forward. But the question is whether or not somebody who is struggling with a job, with a career, with what's next, etc., reaches out. And so we've got to find a way to make it easier for them to reach out, not necessarily with a formal mentorship, but can I have a virtual coffee with you? I want to pick your brain, because you went from director of HR to an entrepreneur, and I'm thinking about stuff like that. And I'd like to better understand my options from the perspective of people who have done that. And I think we need to do more of that. I will tell you that when I was in graduate school, every time I read an article in which I think I learned something, I wrote to the writer of that article. I put it in an envelope with his or her name on it, and then I put it in another envelope to the publisher with a note saying, "Please forward this to the author."
Wow.
And a month later, I would get a response, and they were freaking flattered, right? So I got to talk directly with folks like, Edward Lawler, Peter Block, many of these early pioneers in industrial organizational psychology, in part because I tracked them down and thanked them and was specific about what I learned from them and had a decent question that they hopefully could answer.
Yeah.
And as a result, it began to build a network.
Yeah.
Now, think about what you could do today. Given, all of the tools that you have on the internet, I could find anybody. And when I do, if I have a question because I like something I saw them do or whatever, I tell them, here's thank you for what I've gotten from you.
That is my MO on LinkedIn. I read a great article, I will comment on the article, but I'm going to reach out to that person and I'm going to connect. And I'm going to say, here's why I want to connect. Here's what you said that resonated with me. And I go through all of this. 99.9% of the time, they're going to come back and connect. And a lot of our guests have come on as a result of me reaching out because of something cool that they wrote in doing
if
that.
If they don't, fine. I'm not, it is what it is. I move on. But the reality is, I don't think a lot of people in various professions realize just how accessible people are who are trying to share their ideas and their, and what would make life better. Obviously, when they're, bitching about and whining about something that's a different issue, I ignore those things. I'm going for somebody who's talking about solutions. And optimism.
I know. Before we close out, I want to say hello to Mohammed from Dubai. He's listening in, as well as Peter Persini, who's based in New Jersey in USA, who's also a frequent listener coming in. So, Gerry, thank you so much for making time. And, it was a pleasure, collaborating with you today. And thank you for giving us a masterclass on your journey, man. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
I love it. Thank you so much, Ron. Appreciate it.
Okay,
look forward to seeing you again.
Okay, hang on as we close out.
Okay, will do.
Okay.